Life has no meaning. One of the most common starting points for an existential crisis is realizing that life doesn't come with meaning built in. There's no manual, no instructions, no universal reason explaining why you're here. And for many people, that's the first quiet signal that something's fundamentally strange. At first glance, the idea that life has no meaning sounds bleak, but what it really suggests is that there's no fixed purpose assigned to you from the start. You weren't born with a role waiting to be discovered. There's no cosmic checklist, no invisible job you were meant to do, just existence. This idea is often tied to existentialism or nihilism, but you don't need those labels to feel its weight. It's the recognition that the universe doesn't care what you do. Nature doesn't reward purpose. It just continues. We're used to things having functions. A chair is made to be sat on. A phone is built to communicate. But humans, we weren't made for anything in particular. We're not tools. We're not assigned. We just appear. That's where the discomfort sets in. Many people are raised on stories that everything happens for a reason, that if you look hard enough, life will reveal your true path. But this perspective removes the idea of a path altogether. It says there might not be a reason, no direction, no final answer waiting at the end. And when that realization hits, that no one's guiding the process and nothing's waiting to be uncovered, it can feel like a free fall. But this isn't necessarily where the thought ends. Some thinkers argue this is actually where things begin. If life wasn't designed to mean anything, then what you do with it is entirely up to you. That doesn't mean it's meaningless. It means it's open. And openness is different from emptiness. Imagine visiting an empty field. One person feels let down that there's nothing already built. Another sees a blank canvas. The absence of meaning doesn't remove possibility. It creates it. But the burden of meaning falls on you. Still, that freedom isn't comforting to everyone. For some, the lack of structure is too hollow. For others, it's a kind of strange relief. The permission to exist without a higher purpose to serve. But no matter how it's interpreted, the core idea remains one of the most difficult and enduring questions in modern thought. That life may not come with meaning built in, and if it's ever going to have any, we're the ones who will have to construct it. Not because the universe expects it, but because we do. You cannot die from your perspective. You've been unconscious before, maybe under anesthesia, or in deep sleep without dreams. And yet, you always came back. From your point of view, there was no gap. One moment you were here, the next you were here again. This is where a strange idea begins. You cannot die from your own perspective. Let's unpack that. Dying, biologically, is simple enough to define. Your brain stops functioning, your body shuts down. From the outside, it's final. But what does that feel like from inside? The truth is, you don't feel it. There's no direct experience of death itself. The moment consciousness ends, the you that could be aware of anything is gone. So there's no pain, no darkness, not even the knowledge that something has ended. It's not an experience you have. It's the loss of the capacity to experience altogether. But here's the strange part. If you're the observer of your own life, and if death is truly the end of observation, then there's no point at which you're around to notice it happening. From your subjective point of view, there's only ever ongoing experience. Even during sleep or blackout, time skips forward. You're not aware of the break, you just wake up. So some theorists suggest, what if death, from the inside, feels like nothing more than another skip forward? Now, this doesn't mean you're invincible in any literal sense. Your body still follows the laws of biology. But the point is, you never experience non-existence. You may die in the eyes of others, but in your own chain of awareness, there's never a moment you know it's over. You're never around to say, "I've died." This idea flips how we think about death. Most fears around dying are about what it feels like, what comes after, or what it's like to no longer exist. But those questions assume you'll somehow still be there to experience the absence. In reality, the end of experience doesn't feel like anything. It's the end of feeling itself. You could argue this makes death fundamentally unknowable. You'll never see it coming from the inside, and you'll never witness the aftermath. From your point of view, your awareness either continues or it stops, and you're no longer there to register that it did. Either way, your perspective never includes death. It only ever includes life, up until the very last moment you're aware. And that final moment from the inside will just feel like another moment. You are God without knowing it. You wake up, go about your day, think your thoughts, feel your feelings. It all seems normal. But what if, without realizing it, you're not just in the universe, you are the one imagining it? The idea that you could be God without knowing doesn't come from religion, but from a deeper, stranger look at the nature of reality and self-awareness. It begins with one question: what is consciousness and where does it begin? We usually think of ourselves as small, just one person, one mind, living one life among billions. But your entire experience of the world, everything you've ever seen, heard, or felt, only happens inside your mind. You don't access reality directly. You experience a mental version of it, built by your brain. In that sense, the only universe you know is the one constructed inside your own awareness. Now, take that one step further. If reality only ever appears to you through your mind, how can you be sure it exists independently of you? It's possible, just possible, that your consciousness isn't inside the universe. The universe could be inside your consciousness. This is where the idea turns radical. If you're the one generating the entire world, every person, every moment, then aren't you, in a sense, the creator? Maybe not a divine being in the traditional sense, but a kind of hidden God, the one experiencing, simulating, and sustaining everything without realizing it. Some interpretations of quantum mechanics even suggest that observation is what brings things into definite existence. In a world built on probabilities, your act of awareness might be what pins reality down. That doesn't mean you're omnipotent, but it does mean your consciousness could be deeply entangled with the fabric of existence itself. This also touches on solipsism. From that perspective, it's not so much that you're imagining things on purpose, it's that reality, for you, can't exist without your awareness. Without your mind, the movie stops playing. The phrase, "you could be God without knowing," isn't about power. It's about the possibility that consciousness, your consciousness, is the root layer of experience. Not the passenger, but the engine. Not outside of reality, but the core of it. Whether this idea is true or not isn't the point. What makes it fascinating is how it challenges your basic assumptions. It flips the usual perspective and asks, what if the thing you've been searching for, the meaning, the source, the answer, has always been the one looking? The existence of existence, something exists. That's the one thing we can't deny. You might not know what's real or whether your memories are accurate, but whatever this is, something is happening. That's what makes this idea so strange. Why does anything exist at all? Most of the time, we focus on the things within existence, people, objects, time, space. But this concept steps back further. It's not about what exists, but about existence itself. The idea that there's something instead of absolutely nothing. This might sound like abstract wordplay, but it's actually one of the oldest and most puzzling questions in philosophy. Not what started the universe, not how matter works, but the basic, raw fact that reality is even there to begin with. Try imagining nothing, not empty space, not darkness, not a vacuum, just nothing, no place, no time, no observer. That's what people mean when they say absolute nothingness. And yet that's not what we have. We have something. We have existence. The question is, why? Normally, we explain things by pointing to causes. A tree grows because a seed was planted. The seed exists because of a parent tree. But when it comes to everything, we hit a wall. You can't point to something outside existence to explain it, because that thing would also have to exist. And then you're back to square one. This creates a kind of logical loop. Existence can't be explained by anything other than itself. But that explanation doesn't actually explain why it exists in the first place. Some theories try to solve this with physics. Maybe there are quantum laws that make existence inevitable. But even then, we're left asking, why do those laws exist? Why do they have the power to produce anything at all? Others take a different route. Maybe existence doesn't need a reason. Maybe it's just a brute fact, something that simply is, without explanation. But that answer tends to feel incomplete. It skips over the part we're trying to understand, the existence of existence itself. This concept also pushes against how we think about meaning. If existence had to happen, if there's no alternative, that implies a kind of necessity. But if it didn't have to happen, then it could have just not. And that makes its presence feel strange, fragile, or even accidental. In science, we often try to explain things by breaking them down into parts. But with existence, there's no smaller piece to analyze. There's just the undeniable reality that something is, when it didn't obviously need to be. The existence of existence might be the most basic mystery we'll ever face. It's not about understanding galaxies or particles. It's about understanding why there's anything to understand at all. And so far, we still don't know the answer. Nothing is everything. We usually think of nothing as empty, blank, meaningless. But what if nothing isn't just a gap between things? What if it's the foundation of everything? The phrase, "nothing is everything," sounds like a contradiction. But it's actually a surprisingly powerful way of understanding existence itself. To get there, we start with how we define nothing. In everyday language, nothing means absence, no objects, no thoughts, no people, just a void. But in physics and philosophy, nothing gets more complicated. In quantum physics, even empty space isn't really empty. There's a constant background buzz of virtual particles popping in and out of existence. What looks like nothing turns out to be full of activity. Some theories even suggest that the entire universe could have emerged from a quantum vacuum, a state of nothing that still had enough potential to create space, time, and matter. This flips the script. Maybe nothing isn't the absence of everything. Maybe it's the potential for everything. Now let's take it further. Think about silence. On its own, silence is just the absence of sound. But in music, silence gives shape to the notes. In art, empty space defines the figure. In language, a pause can change the meaning of a sentence. In other words, nothing isn't useless. It helps structure the something. The same logic can apply to consciousness. When you close your eyes and clear your thoughts, there's still awareness, even if there's no specific object in focus. That blank space in the mind isn't meaningless. It's what allows anything meaningful to appear. Without that baseline emptiness, no experience could stand out. From a philosophical angle, some traditions, like certain schools of Buddhism, suggest that emptiness or nothingness isn't something to avoid. It's not despair, it's not nihilism. It's a recognition that everything we hold on to, identity, objects, goals, is temporary, shifting, and dependent on context. In that view, realizing that everything is rooted in nothing helps loosen the grip we have on needing things to be solid, permanent, or perfect. So when someone says, nothing is everything, it's not just wordplay. It's an idea that shows up in science, in art, in meditation, and in life. The space between things, the quiet, the pause, the emptiness, isn't the opposite of meaning. It's what makes meaning possible in the first place. You're a glitch from two realities. Most people assume they exist, that there's a past behind them, a future ahead, and a stable reality holding everything together. But what if that sense of continuity is just an error? What if you're not a person in a universe, but a brief malfunction, a glitch suspended between two realities that never even formed? This idea sounds absurd, but it begins with a simple observation. Everything you experience is filtered through your mind. Sights, sounds, thoughts, all stitched together into a timeline that feels solid. But when you break that down, you find a fragile process. The brain doesn't show you reality. It assembles a guess. It patches together memory, expectation, and sensory input into something that feels smooth. Now imagine that process never had a full structure to work with, no real world to anchor to, no original reality that came before, and no destination after. Just raw fragments trying to form a pattern. The result? A self, a flicker of consciousness, trying to make sense of its own presence. But if there was never a real context to begin with, then the you that feels real might just be the side effect of broken logic, not the center of a story, but the leftover noise from two stories that fail to load. Think of how computers sometimes freeze between instructions. For a brief moment, the system doesn't know what state it's in. That's what this theory suggests about your existence. You're not part of a running system. You're what happens when two failed outcomes overlap in memory. This is different from dreaming, simulation theory, or solipsism. Those ideas still assume something exists, a dreamer, a simulator, or a mind. This idea strips even that away. There was never a full reality on either side of you. Just partial frames that never rendered, and you're stuck in the one spot where they accidentally crossed. And yet, within that glitch, awareness flickers. You think, you feel, you build meaning, but it's all happening in a place that was never supposed to be. This also explains why certain things feel off, moments of déjà vu, false memories, or the sense that reality bends in subtle ways. The system isn't broken because of you. You are the break. The structure around you doesn't fail. It never existed in the first place. From this view, your experience isn't a piece of a larger truth. It's the unstable midpoint between two truths that never stabilized. You're the echo between worlds that had no beginning and no follow-through. And somehow, inside that space, you became aware. Reality might just be dream. Sometimes a dream feels so real that, for a moment, you forget it's not. You wake up and remember who you are, where you are, and what's going on. But during that dream, everything made sense, even if it didn't. The experience felt complete. That moment of confusion is at the heart of a famous idea from ancient Chinese philosophy, known as the butterfly dream. The story comes from Zhuangzi, a philosopher who lived over 2,000 years ago. One night, he dreamt he was a butterfly. He wasn't aware of being a person dreaming about being a butterfly. He simply was a butterfly, flying through the air, free and unaware of anything else. But when he woke up, he found himself lying in bed as Zhuangzi. And that's where the strange part begins. He didn't know whether he had dreamt he was a butterfly, or if he was actually a butterfly now dreaming he was Zhuangzi. The idea sounds like a riddle, but it taps into a deeper question. How can we be sure that what we're experiencing right now is real? Dreams feel real while we're in them. And waking life, in some ways, might just be another kind of story the brain tells us. One that feels more stable because it's consistent. The butterfly dream isn't just about sleep. It raises questions about the nature of identity, consciousness, and perception. If your experience of being a butterfly felt just as vivid as your experience of being human, what makes one more real than the other? Is reality determined by consistency, memory, or something else entirely? Modern science echoes some of this uncertainty. Neuroscience shows that our experience of the world is built by the brain, using sensory input, memory, and expectations. It doesn't give us raw truth. It gives us a version of reality that makes sense to us. Dreams are built the same way, just with different inputs. Virtual reality brings this idea closer to home. Put on a headset and your senses start to respond to a digital world. Your body tenses at fake heights. Your emotions react to simulated events. It shows how flexible perception is, how easily the brain can treat something made up as something real. But the butterfly dream isn't saying we're definitely dreaming. It's pointing to the limits of certainty. It reminds us that even our most familiar experiences rely on trust, in our senses, in our memories, and in the stability of the world around us. Whether Zhuangzi was a butterfly or a man isn't the point. The story challenges the idea that we can always draw a clean line between what's real and what just feels real. And that possibility, that reality might be more flexible than we assume, is what keeps the butterfly dream relevant even thousands of years later. Cause and effect is just illusion. When one thing happens and then another thing follows, it's natural to assume the first one caused the second. That's how we make sense of the world. But there's a strange idea that challenges this basic assumption. It suggests that cause and effect might not be real, or at least not in the way we think. Instead of one thing causing another, we may just be noticing patterns and assuming a connection that doesn't actually exist. This concept goes back to philosophy and has since shown up in physics and cognitive science. The idea is simple. When two things happen close together in time, like flipping a switch and a light turning on, the brain links them. It builds a story. The switch caused the light. But what we're really observing is just a sequence. This, then that. The idea that one caused the other is something the brain adds after the fact. Scottish philosopher David Hume famously pointed this out. He argued that cause and effect isn't something we observe directly. We see one event, then another, and then we project a connection based on habit. It works most of the time, but it's still an assumption, not something we can actually prove by observation alone. In everyday life, this usually doesn't matter. Cause and effect seems obvious. Press a button, the elevator comes. Eat too much sugar, feel sick. These patterns are reliable. But when we zoom out, things get more complicated. In physics, especially in quantum mechanics, events don't always follow a neat chain of causes. Sometimes particles behave in unpredictable ways. They can even appear to influence each other instantly over a distance, something known as entanglement. These events don't always fit the clean logic of A causes B. And in certain interpretations, what we call causation may just be a convenient way to describe sequences we don't fully understand. There's also the role of the observer. In some theories, what we see as cause and effect can depend on how, or even if, we measure something. That means the relationship between events might not be as fixed or objective as it feels. In psychology, our belief in cause and effect can lead to all kinds of errors. People link unrelated events, like lucky socks and winning a game, because they happen together. Superstitions, biases, and even conspiracy theories can grow from the brain's tendency to search for patterns, even when none are there. This doesn't mean cause and effect is completely useless. It's still a powerful tool for prediction and explanation. But this idea asks us to consider the possibility that it's more of a mental shortcut than a physical truth, a way for our brains to organize information, not a law built into the structure of the universe. What looks like a chain of causes may just be a series of events happening in order, with the meaning added after the fact by us. Universe is a predatory algorithm. Everywhere you look in nature, something is trying to consume, outsmart, or overpower something else. From viruses to galaxies, the universe seems to run on systems that prioritize survival, replication, and dominance. The idea behind the universe is a predatory algorithm is that this pattern isn't random. It might be the actual rule set beneath everything. To understand it, start with the word algorithm. In simple terms, it's a step-by-step process, a set of instructions that produces a result. Your phone uses algorithms to filter photos. Your body uses them to heal wounds. Evolution uses them to select traits that work and discard traits that don't. Now imagine that the universe itself operates through something like that, a relentless, self-optimizing process designed to select for persistence, not fairness, not comfort, just continuation, regardless of what gets destroyed in the process. In biology, this shows up through natural selection. Species evolve traits that help them survive, often at the cost of other species. Plants outcompete each other for sunlight. Animals develop weapons, deception, or speed. Life thrives by overwhelming other life. But the idea goes deeper. Even non-living systems, black holes, thermodynamics, gravity, follow rules that absorb, compress, and erase information. Stars form by collapsing matter. Black holes feed on energy. Order tends to fall into disorder, but never without a cost. Something always gets used up. The predatory part of this idea isn't about malice, it's about structure. The system favors what wins, and what wins is whatever can feed, adapt, and spread faster than the alternative. Whether it's a gene, a meme, a species, or a galaxy, everything is in competition. And everything that can't keep up gets consumed or erased. Even human technology follows this pattern. Algorithms prioritize what grabs attention. Systems evolve to exploit weaknesses in perception. Faster machines replace slower ones. Businesses devour their competitors. At scale, it looks less like cooperation and more like code fighting code, survival rewritten in digital form. This leads to a disturbing possibility that the universe doesn't just allow predatory systems to arise, it inherently selects for them. Not because it wants to, but because that's what the base algorithm optimizes for. Anything that endures must compete. Anything that resists gets replaced. From this perspective, consciousness, creativity, even love, these could just be tools evolved for survival. Features, not goals. Adaptations that helped one version of life outlast another. Calling the universe a predatory algorithm doesn't mean there's a designer. It means the structure itself might be tilted towards self-reinforcing dominance. a system where persistence is the only reward and everything else is secondary. It's not about cruelty, it's about inevitability, a reality where optimization wins no matter the cost. Quantum immortality. Most people accept deep down that their life will end. But what if, from your perspective, it never does? This is the unsettling idea behind quantum immortality, a thought experiment that takes the rules of quantum physics to a bizarre conclusion. It starts with a theory in physics called the many worlds interpretation, which says that every possible outcome of a quantum event actually happens, just in different branching universes. So instead of the universe making a single decision, when a particle is measured, say, going left or right, it splits into both possibilities, one version of reality where it goes left and another where it goes right. This branching supposedly happens constantly, meaning countless versions of you are living out slightly different realities all the time. Quantum immortality asks, what happens when you, personally, face a life or death situation, like a catastrophic accident or a medical emergency? In some branches, you die, but in others, through pure chance, you survive. The claim is that your conscious experience will always continue in the branch where you survive, no matter how improbable. In other words, from your perspective, death never arrives. Everyone else might see you die, but you won't experience being dead. You'll only keep waking up, moment after moment, in the versions of reality where you're still alive. Even if the odds of survival drop to near zero, there's always one timeline, one quantum thread, where you somehow make it through. This isn't saying that you live forever in a healthy, happy body. In fact, the opposite may be true. If quantum immortality is real, you might end up trapped in increasingly unlikely and possibly painful versions of survival. Accidents that should have killed you instead leave you barely hanging on. Diseases progress but never finish the job. Time passes, but your consciousness keeps threading its way through each narrow escape. This version of immortality doesn't mean eternal youth or peace. It's more like an endless hallway with fewer doors left to open each time, yet you never stop moving forward. Now, to be clear, there's no scientific proof that quantum immortality actually happens. The idea is more of a logical offshoot from the assumptions of many worlds theory. Most physicists consider it a speculative possibility, not a prediction. But even as a thought experiment, it's powerful. It challenges the way we think about personal identity, death, and what it even means for an experience to end. If consciousness is always local to the branch where it continues, then subjectively, death might never come, no matter how many times it's supposed to. The lights never go out. They just flicker, then return. That's quantum immortality, not a promise but a possibility. One that makes you wonder if this moment, right now, might be one of many last chances you already passed. You never really had a choice. Every time you pick a shirt, choose a snack, or make a major life decision, it feels like you're in control, like you weighed the options and made a choice. But there's an idea that flips this completely. You never really had a choice. This isn't about pressure or influence. It's about something deeper, the possibility that free will doesn't exist in the way we usually imagine. At its core, the idea suggests that every decision you make was already determined long before you were even aware of it. Let's start simple. Imagine you're deciding between tea and coffee. It feels like a choice, but the outcome depends on things you didn't choose: your habits, your preferences, your mood, the weather, how much sleep you got, and what's in your fridge. All of those factors come together, mostly outside your awareness, to produce a decision that feels spontaneous, but might actually be automatic. In neuroscience, This shows up in experiments where researchers measure brain activity just before someone makes a decision. What they found is that the brain often decides several milliseconds before the person becomes conscious of choosing. In other words, by the time you think you're making a decision, your brain has already made it. Philosophers and scientists use this to support the idea of determinism, the belief that everything, including human thought, follows cause and effect. According to this view, your life is a long chain of events. Your environment, genetics, upbringing, and biology all shape your actions. And if you rewound time and replayed it exactly, you'd make the same choices every time. Not because you're a robot, but because you can't choose what thoughts appear in your head or what desires feel strongest in the moment. Even emotions, like wanting to help someone or feeling guilty about a mistake, come from previous experiences and mental patterns you didn't select. You didn't choose your personality, your impulses, or the thousands of life events that shaped who you are. So when a decision comes up, you're reacting based on all of that, not creating something truly new. Some people push back against this idea because it feels like it takes away responsibility. But it's not about saying people don't matter or can't change. It just reframes how change happens. You can't suddenly will yourself to be different, but the conditions around you can influence how you grow. And those changes, in turn, shape the next set of decisions that seem like free will. So while you might feel like you're steering the ship, the path may already be mapped out, based on everything you've been through and everything that made you you in the first place. The idea that you never really had a choice doesn't mean you're powerless. It just means the power you think you have might not come from where you expected. The observer and the observed are the same thing. When you look at something, a tree, a screen, another person, it feels like there's a clear line between you and the thing you're observing. You're here, it's out there. That boundary feels obvious. But what if it's an illusion? The idea that the observer and the observed are the same thing challenges one of the most basic assumptions about how we experience reality. It suggests that there's no real separation between the mind doing the observing and the world it's observing. They're part of the same process, not two things interacting, but one thing, seen from different sides. This becomes clearer when you look at how perception actually works. Take your sense of sight. You're not seeing the world directly. Your brain is taking in light, processing patterns, filling in gaps, and building a visual experience. The tree in front of you is real, but the image of the tree, what you're aware of, exists in your mind. So in every moment, your experience of the world is shaped by your own body, senses, memory, and attention. The tree you see is not separate from your perception of it. It's constructed through that perception. And the same goes for every sound, shape, or color in your experience. This is where the idea gets deeper. If everything you know about the world is mediated through your perception, then you're not just observing something external, you're participating in it. In fact, your awareness and the thing you're aware of might be two sides of the same coin. Some interpretations of quantum physics take this seriously. In experiments like the double-slit experiment, the outcome seems to depend on whether a particle is being observed. It's not that the particle reacts to being watched in the usual sense. It's that the act of measurement, the interaction between observer and system, helps determine what actually happens. There's no clear line between subject and object. Even outside of physics, this shows up in psychology and philosophy. Your emotional state can shape how you see the world. If you're anxious, a neutral face might seem threatening. If you're calm, the same face might seem kind. The object hasn't changed. Your experience of it has. And that experience is inseparable from you as the observer. So the idea isn't that nothing exists outside you. It's that what you perceive is always entangled with how you perceive. The observer and the observed are not two independent things. They form a feedback loop, where each defines the other. This means consciousness isn't just a window looking out at the world. It's part of the structure of what's being seen. You're not standing outside reality, watching it unfold. You're folded into it, as both the witness and the thing being witnessed, at the same time. Infinite copies of you are suffering. Somewhere out there, there's another version of you. They look like you, talk like you, even remember the same childhood. But today, they woke up to worse news, or lost something they couldn't get back, or just never caught the lucky break you did. The idea that infinite copies of you are suffering comes from one of the strangest consequences of modern physics, the multiverse theory. It suggests that there isn't just one universe, but a vast number of them, possibly infinite, each one slightly different from the last. In this framework, every possible version of your life might be playing out somewhere. One universe where you're a millionaire, another where you never made it past high school, one where everything went your way, and one where nothing did. That sounds like science fiction, but in quantum mechanics, there's a real theory called the many worlds interpretation. It says that every time a quantum event can go one way or another, the universe splits. One version for each outcome. That may include the big things, like whether a treatment works or a plane crashes, but it also includes the smallest changes, a missed call, a slightly different reaction, a moment of hesitation. Now, zoom out and think about what this means. If infinite universes exist and every version of you is living out a different path, then statistically, there are infinite versions of you having a hard time. Not metaphorically, literally. There's a version of you who never got through grief, one who said the wrong thing at the worst time, one who lives in a world that's colder, harsher, or lonelier than this one. And because infinity has no limits, these aren't rare outliers, they're inevitable. But it's not just about fear or sadness. The idea exposes something deeper about the way we think about identity. We like to believe we're a single, solid self. But if the multiverse is real, then you is more of a category, a branching tree of all the ways your life could have gone. In one version, you're thriving. In another, you're falling apart. And yet, every one of them feels like the only version that exists. It also raises strange ethical questions. If infinite suffering versions of you exist, are they just as real as the version watching this right now? Do they matter? Can anything be done about them? The truth is, no one knows for sure if the multiverse exists. But the concept forces us to rethink what it means to be a self, not as a single story, but as one thread in a tangled web of possibilities, a reminder that luck, context, and timing might shape more of our lives than we care to admit. Ego death. Ego death is one of the most disorienting experiences a human being can go through. It doesn't just challenge your sense of self, it strips it away completely. In everyday life, we rely on a constant internal sense of me, a name, a personality, a backstory. We move through the world with the quiet assumption that there's a person behind our thoughts, someone watching, deciding, existing. But ego death is what happens when that illusion breaks, not slowly, all at once. The term doesn't mean physical death. It means the total collapse of the mental model you use to define yourself. That voice in your head that narrates your day. Gone. That feeling of being separate from the world around you. Dissolved. In its place is something radically unfamiliar, a kind of awareness without a center. This state can be triggered in a number of ways. Psychedelic experiences are the most well-known path, but it can also happen during deep meditation, intense emotional distress, or sudden spiritual insight. What matters isn't how it happens, it's what it reveals. When the self drops away, it becomes clear how much of your identity was just a pattern of thoughts held in place by habit. During ego death, people often describe a complete loss of boundaries. There's no longer a clear distinction between subject and object, self and world. Experience still happens, sounds, colors, sensations, but it doesn't feel like it's happening to anyone. There's no observer, just the unfolding of reality, without a point of view. To many, this sounds terrifying, and it can be. The ego doesn't like to be erased, but for some, it brings an unexpected clarity, the realization that the self isn't a fixed thing, it's a process. A mental story we cling to for stability, even if it was never solid to begin with. After an ego death experience, people often describe a permanent shift. They may return to normal life, but with a lighter grip on their identity, less defensiveness, less obsession with image or control, more openness to what is. It's still debated whether this state reflects some deeper truth about consciousness, or if it's just a temporary neurological event. But either way, it forces us to reckon with a powerful idea that who we think we are might not be real, or at least not as real as it feels. In that sense, ego death isn't just a psychological event. It's a mirror held up to the mind itself, showing us that the person we think we are is not permanent, not essential, and maybe not even necessary at all. Time is brain-created experience. The idea that time is a mental construct might sound extreme at first, but it starts with a simple fact. Your brain doesn't perceive reality directly. It receives signal, light, sound, touch, and interprets them. And it does the same with time. We tend to think of time as something that flows outside of us, like a river we're floating down. But biologically, that flow is something your brain actively builds. It doesn't just track events, it creates the sense that they're unfolding in order. Consider how you perceive a conversation. Words come in rapid bursts, one after the other. But your brain doesn't process them instantly. It takes fractions of a second to hear the sound, decode the meaning, and string them into a sentence. The strange thing is, you don't feel that delay. Your brain rearranges everything so it feels seamless, like it happened in real time. This isn't just a trick, it's your brain creating time. There are moments when this becomes obvious. When you're scared, time feels like it slows down. In boring situations, it drags. In exciting ones, it flies by. None of that reflects an actual change in time itself, only a change in how your brain is processing the experience. Time, it turns out, is flexible. This flexibility becomes clearer when something disrupts the brain's sense of time, like under the influence of certain drugs, during intense trauma, or in neurological conditions. People often report time stretching, collapsing, or disappearing altogether. Their brain stops organizing events the usual way, but clocks still tick at the same speed. What's changed is the internal sense of flow, the brain's time. Even more interesting, there's no single time center in the brain. Instead, different brain systems manage different parts of the experience. Some track the order of events, others track how long they last, and others still judge how far apart they feel. The brain integrates all of this into what we call the present, a version of now that's slightly stitched together and already a few milliseconds behind. This helps explain why time can feel so strange in dreams or deep sleep. In those moments, the brain isn't using its usual mechanisms to build time. Without them, the whole structure starts to fall apart, and you realize that time, as you know it, might not be a feature of reality at all, just a frame your brain uses to make sense of change. So when we say time is a brain-created experience, we're not saying clocks aren't real. We're saying the feeling of past, present, and future, the timeline you live on, is an internal model. One that's surprisingly fragile, constantly reconstructed, and only ever exists inside your head. What happens if you never stop being aware? You've probably been awake for several hours now. You've had thoughts, maybe conversations, maybe moments of zoning out. But through all of it, something has stayed constant. Awareness, that steady sense of being here, even when you're doing nothing in particular. Now imagine that awareness never stops, not during sleep, not after death, not ever. This is the idea behind continuous consciousness. It raises a strange possibility that awareness might not just be something you have, it might be something you are. And if that's true, what happens if it never turns off? Let's start with something familiar. You go to bed. You lose awareness as you fall asleep. Then you wake up in the morning, and the light turns back on, so to speak. This pause in consciousness feels normal. It breaks time into pieces we can understand. But what if, in some form, the underlying awareness didn't actually disappear? What if it just shifted? There's a theory that says consciousness is not tied strictly to the brain being awake or alive. Instead, it could be a continuous stream, moving through different experiences. You might not remember each one, but something in you, this base level of awareness, just keeps going. No hard stops. In a more speculative version, this leads to something called quantum immortality. The idea here is that if consciousness can't observe its own non-existence, it might simply never encounter it. Instead, you'd keep experiencing one version of reality where awareness continues, no matter what. This isn't just science fiction. Some versions of this idea show up in philosophy and physics. In particular, it plays with the boundary between life and death, between being and not being. If the core of your consciousness is fundamentally persistent, then there's no definitive off switch. Only transitions. Of course, most of what we know about consciousness is tied to the brain. When the brain stops functioning, awareness seems to stop too. But we've never experienced total non-awareness. By definition, you can't be aware of being unaware. And that makes it difficult to test where awareness ends, if it ever does. This also changes how we think about sleep, anesthesia, or even death. If awareness is continuous beneath all these experiences, then what we call nothingness might never be directly felt. The lights never go out, they just change color. Whether or not it's scientifically provable, the idea is compelling because it flips a familiar belief that awareness is temporary. Instead, it suggests that it might be the only constant. Everything else, your thoughts, your memories, even your body, could come and go. But the raw capacity to experience might keep going, no matter the circumstance. It's one of those ideas that leaves more questions than answers, but it's also one that sticks in your mind. If awareness never truly ends, then reality might never stop unfolding. You can't go back to who you were. There are moments in life where everything changes, sometimes slowly, sometimes all at once. And afterward, things might look the same on the outside, but you know something is different. The idea that you can't go back to who you were isn't about losing memories or forgetting where you came from. It's about the simple reality that once your perspective shifts, your old mindset doesn't fit anymore. Growth, trauma, success, disappointment, all of these experiences change the way you see yourself and the world around you. This change isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's small and steady, like realizing a job you once loved no longer excites you. Other times, it's sudden. The end of a relationship, a major failure, or a new responsibility that forces you to think differently. Whatever the cause, the result is the same. The person you were before that experience can't be fully recovered. That's because identity isn't frozen. It's shaped by what you go through, what you learn, and how you respond. Your opinions, priorities, and emotional reactions all evolve over time. Even if you try to return to a previous version of yourself, the mindset you had at a certain age, the optimism or simplicity you once felt, it doesn't quite fit anymore. You've seen too much, felt too much, or simply changed in ways you didn't plan for. Memory adds another layer. You can remember who you used to be, but that version exists more like a snapshot than a full experience. You remember how things felt, but not how they felt before you knew what would happen next. There's no way to fully unlearn, undo, or unsee what shaped you. People often try, though. They try to get back to a version of themselves that felt happier, freer, or more certain. But those past selves existed in a different time, under different conditions. The desire to return is usually a response to discomfort in the present, a wish to escape current pressure by going back to something that felt easier. But the person who experienced that easier time doesn't exist anymore in the same form. This doesn't mean change is bad. It just means it's permanent. Even positive transformations come with a kind of loss. The person who finally learns to set boundaries can no longer be the version who said yes to everything. The person who overcomes something painful can no longer be the version who hadn't yet felt that kind of pain. Trying to go back often leads to frustration, because what people are really chasing isn't a place or a routine, it's a version of themselves that no longer exists. And that's not a failure, it's just how identity works. It moves forward, even when we're not ready for it. Understanding that you can't go back to who you were is part of understanding how growth really happens, not by repeating the past, but by adjusting to what the present has made of you. You are just the story that you tell yourself. Everyone has a version of themselves in their head. It's not just who you are, it's who you believe you are. The idea is simple but strange. You are just the story you tell yourself. Not a fixed personality, not a consistent self across time, but a running narrative that explains your life, your choices, and your place in the world. This story shapes how you see yourself and how you act, even if it doesn't always match reality. It starts with memory. Your brain can't store every moment, so it picks out events that seem important, then links them together into something that makes sense. Maybe you see yourself as someone who's resilient because you overcame challenges, or someone who's unlucky because things tend to fall apart. Either way, that pattern becomes your story, and over time, it starts to feel like identity. But here's the catch. The story isn't fixed. It's built from selective memories, filtered emotions, and hindsight. The brain edits details to keep the plot consistent. You remember failures that support the idea that you're bad at relationships, but forget small moments that contradict that. You exaggerate turning points, simplify timelines, and draw conclusions that feel true, even when they're not. This self-story becomes a kind of internal guide. It tells you what you're capable of, what to avoid, what kind of person you are. If you think of yourself as the shy one, you might avoid speaking up, not because you can't, but because it doesn't fit the role you've written for yourself. In that way, the story starts shaping behavior. It also means that major life events often cause a kind of narrative stress. A breakup, a job loss, a major success. These moments don't just change your situation, they challenge the story. If the story was, "I always get through things," a sudden failure doesn't just hurt emotionally, it creates confusion about who you are. This idea also explains why people can change, sometimes dramatically, after years of being one way. When the story changes, when someone lets go of old beliefs about themselves, the habits, decisions, and reactions can shift too. It's not that a new person appears out of nowhere. It's that the script changed and the behavior followed. Importantly, the story isn't necessarily false. It's just one version of the truth, built from a limited perspective. And because it feels natural, people rarely question it. But from the outside, others may see a completely different version of who you are, shaped by a different set of observations. So when people say, "You are just the story you tell yourself," they're not saying you're fake or imaginary. They're pointing out that identity isn't a fixed object. It's a process, a constantly updated explanation for why you are the way you are. And that explanation is often more flexible than it feels. Every version of you across your lifetime thinks it's the real one. At 5, you probably thought you had life figured out. Then at 15, you looked back and laughed. At 25, you rolled your eyes at your teenage self. And chances are, 35-year-old you will do the same. Yet, in every moment, you felt like you, like the version that finally got it. That's the strange part. Every version of you across your lifetime thinks it's the real one. This idea plays with the illusion of a fixed identity, the belief that there's a single, continuous you moving smoothly through time. But when you break it down, identity doesn't work like that. What we call self is constantly shifting, shaped by new experiences, changing environments, and even biological changes in the brain. Yet in each phase, that current version always feels like the most authentic version. Think about it. The things you believed 5 years ago about the world, relationships, yourself, might seem naive or even unrecognizable now. But at the time, those beliefs felt completely solid. You didn't feel like a placeholder waiting to become the real you. You were you. This happens because the brain naturally ties our sense of identity to the present. Our thoughts, memories, values, they all feel anchored in the now, so it's easy to believe we've arrived at some final version of ourselves. But that's not how people work. The version of you that exists today is just the current snapshot. It's not final, and it's definitely not permanent. Even physically, you're not the same. Cells die and regenerate. Your brain rewires itself. Your hormones, your reflexes, your energy, all of it changes over time. And as that physical framework changes, your mindset follows. The same decision you'd make at 20 might not feel right at 40, even if nothing dramatic happened. That shift isn't a flaw. It's just part of being a person. This doesn't mean that past versions of you were wrong or fake. It means that identity is more like a slideshow than a single portrait. Each version is valid in its time, shaped by what it knew and how it saw the world. And in that moment, every version believed it was the one that truly understood life. That's what makes this idea both fascinating and humbling. It shows how temporary each mental state really is, and how much we underestimate how different we'll feel in the future. What feels permanent today may not even make sense to us tomorrow. So, the next time you feel certain about who you are, remember that every previous version of you felt that way too. Not because they were wrong, but because that's how identity works. It feels solid while it's happening, even though it's constantly being rewritten. Only your mind exists to you. You're experiencing this moment right now, reading words on a screen, hearing sounds around you, maybe noticing how your body feels. But underneath all of that, there's something easy to overlook. The only thing you can be absolutely sure of is that your mind exists. This idea is at the core of one of the oldest and most unsettling thoughts in philosophy. It says that no matter how real the outside world seems, the only thing you can be certain of is your own conscious experience. Everything else, your surroundings, other people, even your own body, could, in theory, be part of an illusion or a dream. But your awareness of having thoughts, that's undeniable. To understand this better, imagine you're dreaming. In the dream, everything feels real. You talk to people, walk through places, feel emotions. It's only when you wake up that you realize none of it was actually happening. The people weren't real, the place wasn't real, but the fact that you were experiencing something still was. This brings us to the famous philosophical concept known as solipsism. It's the idea that only your own mind can be known to exist for sure, because everything else comes through your perception. You see the world through your senses, but those senses could be tricked or incomplete. You talk to other people, but you don't have access to their inner thoughts. You only hear what they say or see what they do. So while they seem real, you can't verify that they're conscious in the same way you are. Now, that doesn't mean the world is fake or that other people don't exist. In day-to-day life, it makes sense to treat the world as real and to assume others have minds like yours. But from a purely logical standpoint, your own awareness is the only thing you experience directly. Everything else is second-hand, filtered through your senses, shaped by your brain, and interpreted through your thoughts. This can feel a little strange. If only your mind is certain, what does that say about everything else? The answer depends on how far you want to take it. For most people, this concept is more of a reminder than a conclusion. It reminds us that we're trapped inside our own heads. Every sight, sound, smell, or idea has to go through the mind first, before it becomes part of our reality. It also highlights how dependent we are on perception. The world we think we're living in is, in a way, a version built by our brain, constantly updated through input, memory, and attention. You're not just seeing a tree or hearing a voice. You're experiencing your mind's interpretation of those things. So while you may share space with others and interact with the world around you, the only thing you can truly verify, without any doubt, is that your mind is having an experience. That certainty, simple as it sounds, is one of the most profound facts about being human. You are alone in your brain. Every day, people talk, share, listen, and interact. But no matter how connected you feel to someone else, there's one basic truth that doesn't change. You are alone in your brain. This doesn't mean you're isolated from the world. It means that your thoughts, emotions, and experiences are happening entirely inside your own mind, and no one else can access them directly. Other people can guess how you feel, they can empathize, they can relate, but they can't see your thoughts the way you see them. They can't hear your inner voice or feel your exact emotions. That part of you is private by design. The brain acts like a sealed-off control room. Everything you know about the outside world comes in through your sense. But the actual experience of those things, what it feels like to see a sunset or hear your favorite song, gets processed internally. It's your brain that turns raw input into personal experience. This separation becomes especially clear when communication breaks down. you might struggle to explain what you're feeling, even to someone you trust. Words don't always translate inner experience accurately. And even when they do, the person listening still filters them through their own background, emotions, and understanding. This is why two people can go through the same event and come away with completely different interpretations. The event was shared, but the experience was not. Each person experienced it through their own mind, with their own fears, expectations, and memories coloring what happened. You are also the only person who lives with your full story. The jokes you didn't tell, the thoughts you didn't say, the memories you didn't share. They're all stored in your mind, and no one else has access to them unless you choose to let them in. Even then, it's just a fraction of what's there. No one else gets the full version. This becomes more complex when emotions are involved. You might feel lonely, anxious, or overwhelmed, but struggle to explain it to others. They might care deeply, but still not fully get it. Not because they're unwilling, but because experience can't be transferred. It has to be lived. Despite how personal this sounds, it's not always a bad thing. The fact that your mind is your own means you have a space that's uniquely yours. It gives you freedom to imagine, reflect, and think without interruption. But it also explains why true understanding between people is rare, and why connection, when it happens, feels so valuable. Being alone in your brain doesn't mean you're cut off from others. It means that human connection is always an act of translation from one internal world to another. What makes that challenging is also what makes it meaningful. You live in a mind only you can access, and that's what makes your experience yours. Depersonalization. Sometimes a person can feel like they're watching their own life from the outside, like they're there, but not really there. This experience is called depersonalization. It's a psychological state where someone feels disconnected from their own body, thoughts, or sense of self. It's not about forgetting who you are. It's more about feeling like you're not fully inside your own experience. People often describe it as feeling robotic, emotionally numb, or like they're observing themselves in a movie. It's more common than most people realize. Many people go through brief moments of depersonalization during extreme stress, fatigue, or trauma. For example, someone might walk out of a car accident and feel strangely calm and distant, like they're watching it happen to someone else. That's the brain trying to protect itself by switching into a sort of autopilot. In these short-term cases, the feeling usually fades once the situation stabilizes, but for others, it can become more persistent. When it lasts longer or starts interfering with daily life, it can be part of a larger condition called depersonalization, derealization disorder. In those cases, the feeling of being detached becomes frequent and distressing, even though the person is still fully conscious and aware that something feels off. It's important to note that depersonalization isn't a form of psychosis. People going through it usually know that their experiences are strange or unreal. They just can't feel connected to themselves the way they used to. That awareness is actually one of the defining traits of the experience. From a neurological perspective, depersonalization seems to involve a disruption in how the brain integrates emotion and self-awareness. The brain essentially down-regulates emotional responses, leading to a sense of flatness or disconnection. That's why people often say they feel like they're acting out their day instead of living it. They know they're functioning, but something feels missing, like a screen has been placed between them and the world. It can be a deeply confusing experience, especially when it happens without a clear cause. It's often linked to anxiety, trauma, or intense stress. In some cases, It may also be triggered by sleep problems, sensory overload, or certain medications. The common thread is that it tends to occur when the brain feels overwhelmed and tries to dial things down in response. People who experience depersonalization often describe everyday moments in unfamiliar terms. Looking in the mirror might feel strange, as if they're seeing a stranger. Talking to friends or loved ones might feel emotionally distant, even though nothing has changed externally. It's not that they don't care, it's that their connection to their emotions has gone quiet. Understanding depersonalization helps make sense of an experience that can otherwise feel terrifying or isolating. It shows how the brain can shift into protective modes that don't always feel helpful, and how something as basic as being yourself can suddenly feel unfamiliar, even when nothing on the outside seems different. Your mind is an extension of other minds. Most people think of their mind as a private, self-contained space. Thoughts feel personal. Decisions seem internal. But the truth is, your mind is an extension of other minds, shaped, built, and continuously influenced by people around you. From the moment you're born, your brain starts picking up signals from others. Language, for example, isn't something you invent on your own. You absorb it by hearing people speak. Without those voices guiding you, even your ability to think in sentences wouldn't develop the same way. The structure of your thoughts is built using tools you didn't create. They were handed down to you through culture, conversation, and education. That influence only grows as you get older. The way you form opinions, understand social rules, or define right and wrong comes from the people you've spent time around: parents, teachers, friends, even strangers online. You learn how to feel about things by watching how others react. Emotions, behaviors, even memories are shaped by the environment of other minds. This process is so natural that it often goes unnoticed. You might feel like your preferences and values are uniquely yours, but if you trace them back, they often reflect your surroundings. The music you like, the jokes you find funny, the food you crave, all of it is influenced by exposure and repetition, not just individual taste. Even your sense of self is built in relation to others. You figure out who you are by comparing, imitating, reacting. If you've ever picked up someone's phrases without realizing it, or changed how you act depending on the group you're in, you've experienced how easily minds blend together. This doesn't mean you're being inauthentic. It means the mind is socially wired. It doesn't operate in isolation. In psychology, this is sometimes called distributed cognition, the idea that thinking doesn't just happen inside your brain. It happens in your environment, in the conversations you have, in the tools you use, and in the people you interact with. When you write notes, use a map, or bounce ideas off someone else, you're extending your thinking outside your head. Social media adds another layer. Every day, you take in hundreds of thoughts that aren't your own, opinions, moods, beliefs, and without realizing it, they begin to shape how you see things. What seems like your viewpoint might actually be the echo of dozens of other voices. The idea that your mind is partly made of other minds doesn't mean you lack individuality. It means that your individuality is built within a shared system. Your thoughts come from somewhere. They pass through filters shaped by history, language, and social influence. And in turn, your mind becomes part of that same network, shaping others as it has been shaped. So even when you're alone, you're never really thinking in isolation. You're carrying parts of everyone who's ever influenced how you think, speak, and understand the world. Your past self is a different person. You probably have memories that feel vivid even years later, a classroom, a conversation, a moment of regret or pride. You can picture it clearly. But here's the strange part. The version of you who lived that moment isn't the same as the version who's remembering it now. This idea challenges something most people take for granted, the continuity of identity. We like to think we're one person, with a consistent self stretched across time. But psychologically and biologically, that's not really the case. Start with the basics. Your brain is constantly changing. Neurons rewire, beliefs shift, and personality traits evolve. Even your cells are replaced over time. The brain you had at age 10 isn't identical to the one you have now. It doesn't store memories like files on a computer. Instead, it reconstructs them, reassembling bits and pieces every time you recall something. So when you remember a moment from your past, you're not just accessing a frozen snapshot. You're recreating it using the tools of who you are now. Your current values, emotions, and experiences color what you remember and how you remember it. For example, a memory of being embarrassed in high school might feel crushing at the time, but recalling it years later, you might laugh, feel distant from it, or interpret it completely differently. The event hasn't changed. You have. And so has your relationship to that memory. This gets more complicated with emotionally charged experiences. The way you interpret a breakup, a childhood conflict, or even a moment of success can shift over time. You might feel more sympathy for others involved, or less. You might reinterpret what happened, question your actions, or even wonder if the memory is accurate at all. The science backs this up. Studies show that memory is highly unreliable, especially when influenced by strong emotion or time. Each time you remember something, your brain can subtly edit the memory, and the edited version becomes the one you store next. That means memories aren't just stories from the past. They're also reflections of who you are now, trying to make sense of who you were then. The person remembering is a different person from the one who lived it. Different context, different priorities, sometimes even a different worldview. This doesn't make memory useless, but it does make it fluid. Personal history isn't a fixed record. It's more like a collection of living documents, constantly revised without your permission. That's why this idea matters. It reminds us that our sense of self across time is stitched together from interpretations, not objective facts. You are not the same person remembering the memory. And because of that, the past is never quite as solid as it seems. It bends, not just with time, but with the person doing the remembering. You'll never be the same person twice. You're not the same person you were a year ago, or a month ago, or even this morning. That's the core of the idea. You'll never be the same person twice. It might sound exaggerated, but it's backed by how the human mind and body actually work. Change isn't something that happens to you once in a while. It's happening constantly, in ways you don't always notice. Let's start with the basics. Your body is always renewing itself. Skin cells, blood cells, even parts of your brain are in a constant state of repair and replacement. The person physically standing in your shoes today isn't made up of all the same material from a few years ago. But the changes go beyond biology. Mentally and emotionally, you're always adjusting, learning, forgetting, reacting. Every conversation you have, every piece of news you hear, every thought you dwell on leaves a small imprint. It might shift your opinion, change your behavior, or quietly rewire the way you think about something. Memory also plays a role. Your brain doesn't store your life like a video. It reshapes and edits your memories over time. So even your personal history isn't fixed. What you remember, how you frame it, and how it feels today might not match how it felt 5 years ago. As those memories shift, your identity shifts with them. The same goes for your values and priorities. What mattered deeply to you in your teenage years might feel irrelevant now. You may still be you, but the way you see the world and your role in it isn't static. Your goals, your fears, your habits, even your tone of voice, they all evolve. And then there's context. You act differently in different settings, at work, at home, with strangers, or with close friends. That's not being fake. It's a normal part of being a flexible, adaptive human. But it also means that your identity isn't one fixed thing. It shifts depending on who you're around, what you're doing, and how you feel in that moment. This doesn't mean you're completely unrecognizable from one day to the next. Patterns still exist. You develop routines, preferences, and personality traits that feel consistent. But even those are shaped by external and internal changes over time. The version of you that makes a tough decision after years of experience isn't the same version who once struggled with it. Over time, the changes add up. You might look back at a past version of yourself and feel like you're remembering a different person, someone who thought differently, acted differently, maybe even believed in things you no longer relate to. And in a way, you are. Understanding this idea isn't just about memory or identity. It's a reminder that personal change is ongoing. You're not stuck in one version of yourself, and you never were. You're part of a process that rewrites itself quietly, day by day. The curse of knowledge. Once you know something, you can't unknow it, and that can be a problem. That's the core of the curse of knowledge. Not just a communication gap between you and others, but a deeper, more personal burden. It's the moment you realize that learning something new doesn't always bring clarity or comfort. Sometimes it just makes everything heavier. The curse of knowledge changes how you see the world. What once felt simple now seems flawed. What others accept without question, you start to overanalyze. You might struggle to relate to people who don't know what you know, not out of pride, but because your mental framework has changed. You've crossed a line you can't go back from. At first, it shows up in subtle ways. A joke you can no longer enjoy once you understand what's behind it. A belief that crumbles under new information. A job that becomes harder once you start seeing the inefficiencies others overlook. Knowledge expands your vision, but it can also isolate you from those who haven't had the same exposure. This isolation isn't always dramatic. It might just be a growing sense of frustration. You try to explain something, but it feels like you're talking from a different dimension. You want to simplify, but now everything feels connected, layered, too complex to break down. And the more you learn, the harder it becomes to see things through a beginner's eyes. Knowledge also removes comfort. Once you understand the risks behind something, or the contradictions in an idea you once held, it's hard to feel at ease. You might long for the days when you didn't know better, but you can't return to that state. The innocence isn't recoverable. The illusion is broken. This isn't just about technical skills or facts. It's about emotional weight. Knowing how relationships fail, how systems are flawed, how fragile everything is. That kind of knowledge doesn't come with a user manual. It often comes with anxiety, doubt, even resentment. Not because knowledge is bad, but because it changes your internal world in ways others might not notice. People often talk about knowledge as a gift, and it can be, but it's also a shift. It reshapes your sense of normal. It sharpens your awareness. It sets you apart in subtle ways, not above others, but outside them. You carry more, not just in your mind, but in your experience of reality. The curse of knowledge isn't just about forgetting how to teach others. It's about realizing that understanding more can also mean feeling more. Complexity, responsibility, discomfort. And that knowledge, once gained, doesn't always give you control. Sometimes it just leaves you unable to look away. One day you will wake up for the last time. Every morning you wake up, often in the same bed, to the same sounds, with the same thoughts about what comes next. It feels routine. But there's a quiet truth most of us don't think about. One day, that routine will end. You will wake up for the last time. This isn't meant to be dramatic. It's just a fact. There will be a final morning, even if it looks exactly like the one before. You won't know it's the last one. You'll stretch, check your phone, maybe make coffee. And then at some point, hours or even minutes later, life will stop. The idea here isn't just about death. It's about how finite consciousness really is. Every living thing has a beginning and an end. You don't remember the first day you woke up, and you probably won't realize when the last one is happening either. It's not like a movie that builds up to a big final scene. Most lives fade out in the middle of the story. We tend to imagine life as something open-ended. We make plans, set goals, and push things off for later. And in most cases, there is a later until there isn't. That's what makes this idea so powerful. It places focus on something that's always true but rarely felt. Time is moving in only one direction. It's common to hear phrases like, live every day like it's your last, but that usually turns into pressure to achieve more, be more productive, or chase extreme experiences. That's not what this idea is about. It's not about rushing to do everything. It's about realizing that even normal moments are temporary. The last time you wake up might not be a special day. You might have a dentist appointment. You might be behind on emails. You might feel tired or annoyed or fine. It's the ordinariness of that moment that makes this concept land. Because it shows how fragile everyday life really is. How even the most average routine is sitting on a ticking clock. This awareness doesn't have to feel dark. It just highlights something that's easy to forget. Being alive, even for a regular Tuesday, is not a guaranteed repeat. The mornings you wake up to, even the boring ones, are limited in number. And while no one knows when the count runs out, the fact that it does is what gives the idea its weight. There is no warning bell for the last morning, no dramatic music, no official ending. It will look like life until it doesn't. That's not a threat. It's a quiet truth hiding in plain sight, one that's always been there, ticking behind every alarm clock. You became who you had to be, not who you are. A lot of the choices you've made in life didn't come from freedom, they came from pressure. That's the idea behind the phrase, you became who you had to be, not who you are. It suggests that many of the traits people develop, the way they act, the roles they play, the attitudes they adopt, aren't always based on their true preferences or personality. They're shaped by circumstances, expectations, and survival. It starts early. A child in a noisy household might become quiet, not because they're naturally shy, but because it avoids conflict. Someone who grows up around unpredictability might become overly organized or cautious. These traits can look like personality, but they're actually adaptations, habits formed to fit a specific environment. Over time, these adaptations become automatic. You don't think of them as choices anymore, you just see them as who you are. But the original reason behind them often gets buried. What began as a strategy becomes an identity. This happens in more subtle ways too. Social norms, family rules, or cultural values can nudge people into becoming a version of themselves that fits a mold. Maybe you became responsible because others weren't. Maybe you became agreeable because conflict wasn't safe. Maybe you became high-achieving because success was the only way to feel valuable. These patterns are rarely questioned because they work. They keep things stable, help you succeed, or protect you from discomfort. But the downside is that they can also disconnect you from your natural instincts, the way you might have developed if you weren't constantly responding to external pressure. That doesn't mean these versions of yourself are fake. They're real, just not complete. They reflect what was needed at the time, not necessarily what feels right now. And because they're reinforced by routine and repetition, it's easy to forget that alternatives were ever possible. This disconnect can become clearer in adulthood, especially when the environment changes. A person who spent years being the problem solver might struggle to express vulnerability. Someone who was always the entertainer might feel uncomfortable being serious. These roles don't just influence how others see you, they shape how you see yourself. Sometimes this leads to confusion. You might feel stuck, frustrated, or uncertain about what you actually want, because so much of your behavior has been driven by what was necessary, not what was authentic. That gap between who you had to be and who you are can be hard to define, but once you notice it, it's hard to ignore. Understanding this idea doesn't require rejecting your past or starting over. It's about recognizing how much of your identity was built under pressure and how much room there might still be to explore. You're not limited to the traits you learned out of necessity. Those parts of you served a purpose, but they don't have to be the whole story. Existence was not chosen by you. You didn't decide to be here. Before you had thoughts, memories, or a name, you already existed. You didn't pick your body, your time in history, or the people who raised you. Existence was not chosen by you. It was something you were placed into without warning or permission. This idea isn't just about biology. It points to a deeper fact about human life, that none of us had a say in showing up. You didn't get a checklist before birth asking where you'd like to be born, what kind of personality you'd like, or which challenges you'd prefer to face. You simply arrived and had to figure things out from there. At first, this may sound obvious. Of course, no one chooses to be born. But the implications run deeper. Every value you hold, every belief you carry, every decision you've ever made, all of it started in a context you didn't design. You were born into a world that was already moving, shaped by systems, rules, and expectations that you didn't create. From day one, your brain began absorbing language, behavior, and culture from everything around you. This doesn't mean you have no control. People make choices every day, but those choices are built on foundations you didn't lay. Your understanding of good and bad, your fears, your sense of humor, even your goals, they all formed inside a system that existed long before you did. It also explains why so many parts of life feel puzzling or unfair. People inherit circumstances they never asked for. Some are born into safety, others into chaos. Some carry burdens that aren't visible to anyone else. These differences weren't earned or chosen, they just happened. And yet people are often expected to navigate life as if they started from the same place. The idea that you didn't choose to exist also adds perspective to things like identity and responsibility. You didn't pick your temperament. You didn't choose to be someone who overthinks, or someone who trusts easily, or someone who struggles in crowds. These traits evolved over time, shaped by genetics, experience, and environment, none of which were up to you at the start. Even your internal world, your thoughts, your moods, your habits developed within the framework of a mind you didn't request. You're responsible for what you do with it, but you didn't sign up for the job. This idea isn't about blame or avoidance. It's about recognizing how much of life begins outside of your control. It's not a failure to admit you didn't choose to be here. It's a reminder of just how much we're all responding to a world we were thrown into, doing our best to shape it, even though we didn't ask to enter it. Consciousness is mistake. Being aware of your own existence might seem like the most natural thing in the world. You think, you feel, you make choices. It feels normal. But there's a strange idea in philosophy and science that flips that around. It says consciousness might not be a feature, it might be a glitch. The theory goes like this. Life evolved through trial and error. Over millions of years, organisms got better at reacting to their environment. Vision, movement, memory, all useful tools for survival. Somewhere along the way, certain animals, including humans, developed brains advanced enough to model the world around them in more detail. They didn't just react to the world, they could predict it. But then something unexpected happened. These brains didn't just model the outside world, they started modeling themselves. And that's where consciousness began. The moment the system became aware of its own thoughts, something new entered the picture. Subjective experience, the feeling of being you. The idea that this could be a mistake comes from how unnecessary and costly consciousness actually is. You don't need it to breathe, to move, or even to survive. Most life on Earth operates without it. Even within humans, a lot of daily functions, walking, speaking, even driving on autopilot, can happen without much conscious awareness at all. And consciousness doesn't just add complexity, it adds problems. It introduces things like existential dread, self-doubt, overthinking, and emotional pain that continues long after danger has passed. An animal can feel pain, but a conscious mind can imagine pain before it happens and remember it long after it ends. That's not necessarily helpful. It can even get in the way. In this view, consciousness wasn't some grand evolutionary goal. It was a side effect. The brain got so good at simulating things that it accidentally simulated itself. Like a computer that's powerful enough to start running programs about its own hardware, not because that helps it compute faster, but just because it can. From this angle, being self-aware is kind of like constantly narrating your own experience. And while that narration can help with planning or reflection, it can also spiral into anxiety or confusion. You start asking questions that can't be answered about purpose, identity, mortality. Not because the world suddenly changed, but because your brain gave you the ability to notice things most animals never have to think about. This doesn't mean consciousness is bad. It's led to art, science, empathy, and creativity. But the argument here is that those things weren't inevitable. They're just what happened once the brain accidentally created a user interface for itself. So when people say consciousness is a mistake, they don't mean it was wrong in a moral sense. They mean it may never have been part of the plan. Evolution didn't intend for minds to become self-aware. It just happened. And now we're the ones living with the side effects. Pain will always outweigh the pleasure. Most people hope that the good parts of life will make up for the bad, that joy can cancel out suffering. But there's a philosophical idea that challenges that, and it says that pain will always outweigh the pleasure. This perspective isn't about being negative. It's about looking closely at how life feels from the inside. The idea is that pain, both physical and emotional, leaves a stronger mark than pleasure, that we remember hurt longer, react to it more strongly, and spend more of our lives avoiding discomfort than chasing happiness. It starts with a basic observation. Pain demands attention. If you have a headache, a stomach cramp, or even a stubbed toe, it's hard to focus on anything else. Pleasure, on the other hand, tends to fade quickly. A good meal, a compliment, a moment of laughter, those feel nice, but they pass. Pain often lingers. This imbalance shows up in everyday life. A single rude comment can stick with someone for days, even if they've received dozens of kind words. A minor injury can ruin a week, while a great day can be thrown off by one inconvenience. The highs often feel brief and scattered. The lows feel heavier and more consistent. Some philosophers argue that this isn't just an emotional pattern. It's built into how our brains work. From an evolutionary standpoint, pain had to be taken seriously. It warned us of danger and helped us survive. So the brain evolved to pay extra attention to threats, risks, and losses. Pleasure doesn't work the same way. It's rewarding, but it doesn't protect us from harm. This leads to a larger idea that life as a whole may contain more suffering than joy. Every person experiences illness, loss, fear, and disappointment at some point. Not everyone reaches the same level of happiness. And even when we do feel good, it often takes work, planning a vacation, building relationships, finding purpose. Pain, by contrast, shows up on its own. Some thinkers take this further. They say that if you could add up every moment of pleasure and every moment of pain across a lifetime, the pain would win. That even people who appear happy still carry anxiety, regret, or frustration beneath the surface, and that most of life is spent trying to manage that discomfort. This view isn't universally accepted, but it raises important questions about how we understand well-being. It challenges the common belief that happiness is the default and sadness is the interruption. Instead, it suggests that pain might be the baseline and that moments of relief or joy are the exceptions. Whether or not someone agrees with it, the idea forces a different way of thinking about the human experience. Not as a smooth ride with a few bumps, but as a constant effort to balance out a system that's tilted, not because of any failure, but because of how we're built. Your mind wasn't designed for happiness. Most people assume the mind is supposed to help them feel good, that happiness is the natural setting. But the truth is, your brain didn't evolve to make you happy. It evolved to keep you alive. This changes everything, because once you understand that, a lot of everyday struggles start to make sense. The anxiety, the overthinking, the constant comparing, the self-doubt, even the boredom. These aren't glitches in the system. They are the system. From an evolutionary perspective, the brain's job wasn't to give you peace. It was to scan for danger, avoid threats, and maximize survival. That meant focusing on what could go wrong, not what's going well. If something in your environment could hurt you, your ancestors needed to spot it fast. The ones who were calm and carefree didn't last very long, but the ones who worried a bit more, who overanalyzed, who stayed alert, they survived. They passed those traits down. This survival-based wiring still runs today. But now, instead of wild animals and food shortages, it reacts to emails, deadlines, social media, and awkward conversations. Your brain still treats uncertainty like a threat, even when there's no real danger. That's why it clings to worry, plays worst-case scenarios, and focuses on what's missing instead of what's present. From the brain's perspective, that's a feature, not a bug. Even happiness itself is treated cautiously. It's temporary by design. When something good happens, you feel a hit of satisfaction, but it doesn't last. The feeling fades, and soon you're chasing the next thing. This is called the hedonic treadmill. It keeps you striving, moving, surviving. but never fully content. Biologically, your brain prioritizes things like reproduction, social status, and energy conservation. It rewards behaviors that help pass on genes. That includes pleasure, but only in short bursts. Long-term contentment isn't efficient. If you felt completely satisfied, you'd stop striving, and that's not good for a species trying to outcompete others. On top of that, your brain filters the world in a way that often backfires. It uses shortcuts and assumptions, known as cognitive biases. One example is the negativity bias, the tendency to notice bad things more than good ones, or comparison bias, the urge to measure your life against others. These patterns were useful for survival, but they create constant dissatisfaction in the modern world. None of this means happiness is impossible. It just means it takes effort. You have to work against what your brain naturally defaults to. That might involve slowing down, noticing when your mind spirals, or deliberately shifting your focus to what's actually going well. It's not always easy, because the brain resists anything that seems inefficient. But the bigger point is this. If you've ever wondered why happiness doesn't come naturally, why it slips away, why it never feels permanent, it's not your fault. Your mind was never built for that. It was built to keep you alive, and it's been doing that job a little too well. Reality is controlled hallucination. Everything you see, hear, and feel, all of it, is being constructed inside your brain. The idea sounds strange at first, but it's a well-supported concept in neuroscience. What we experience as reality is not the outside world directly. It's a simulation generated by the brain, based on sensory information, past experiences, and internal models. In other words, we don't see the world as it is. We see it as the brain predicts it to be. Here's how it works. Your eyes don't show you a raw video feed. They detect patterns of light. That information travels to the brain, where it's interpreted, filled in, and turned into something meaningful, like a face, a wall, or a tree. The same goes for sound, touch, taste, and even your sense of time. Your brain doesn't just gather data. It reconstructs your surroundings in a way that feels seamless and real. This process is incredibly fast and usually accurate enough to keep us alive and functional. But it's not perfect. That's why optical illusions work. They reveal shortcuts your brain takes to save time. It's also why memories can feel real, even when they're distorted, or why dreams can be convincing until you wake up. The brain uses predictions because it's more efficient than waiting to process every detail in real time. It's constantly updating a kind of internal simulation based on your expectations and the sensory signals coming in. That's why, for example, you can recognize a familiar voice over a noisy phone line, or walk through your house in the dark without thinking. But if reality is a simulation built inside your head, that raises an interesting point. You're not experiencing the world directly, you're experiencing a model of it. And this model is unique to you. Two people might be in the same room but perceive it slightly differently, depending on their attention, memory, mood, or personal history. This doesn't mean the outside world doesn't exist. It means your brain gives you a simplified version of it, one that's useful but not complete. Like a video game rendering a 3D space based on code, your brain builds a conscious experience based on inputs it receives and predictions it makes. Sometimes the system gets things wrong. Phantom limb pain, where someone feels sensation in a limb that's no longer there, shows how the brain's model can override physical reality. So does motion sickness, where your inner ear and visual system disagree about what's happening. The confusion doesn't come from the outside world, it comes from inside the simulation. Understanding reality as a brain-created simulation doesn't mean we're living in a computer. It means our sense of the world is always filtered through the brain's internal processing. We trust what we see and hear, but what we're actually experiencing is a real-time construction, shaped, edited, and personalized by a system we didn't design, running quietly behind everything we think is real. Pro-mortalism. Life is hard, and for some people, it doesn't just feel unfair, it feels like a mistake. Pro-mortalism is the philosophical idea that death is better than continued existence, not just in specific cases, but in general. It suggests that the best outcome for any conscious being is to die as soon as possible, or ideally, to never have existed at all. This idea goes even further than antinatalism, which argues that bringing new life into the world is morally questionable because of the suffering it inevitably involves. Pro-mortalism adds a sharper edge. It says the suffering isn't just a problem at birth. It continues for as long as someone remains alive. To understand where this argument comes from, you have to look at how some philosophers measure value. For instance, in certain views within utilitarian ethics, the quality of a life is judged by the amount of pleasure and pain it contains. And if the pain outweighs the pleasure, even by a small margin, that life might be considered not worth continuing. Supporters of pro-mortalism argue that this is the case for most people, maybe even all people. They point to things like chronic anxiety, trauma, aging, loneliness, and the looming certainty of death itself. Even if life has good moments, they say, those are usually short-lived, while pain and stress tend to last much longer. So if someone's life is mostly struggle, or even just slightly net negative, they argue that ending it sooner is the kinder option. Of course, this view is controversial. Most people instinctively want to stay alive. Evolution has built that drive into us. So when we hear an idea like this, it sounds unnatural, even offensive. But philosophical arguments don't always align with instincts. Pro-mortalism isn't saying people should feel suicidal. It's trying to make a moral claim about the structure of conscious life. That sentience itself might be the problem. It also leads to complicated questions. For example, if life isn't worth living, is it ethical to keep people alive against their will? Should society focus on preventing suffering at all costs, even if that means ending lives painlessly? These aren't easy debates, and most philosophers reject the more extreme conclusions. But they still show how the idea forces us to think differently about topics we usually avoid. Importantly, pro-mortalism doesn't argue for reckless harm or violence. It's not about promoting death in a chaotic way. It's a thought experiment built on the logic of suffering, not destruction. It's meant to be unsettling. It's meant to challenge assumptions. And even if most people reject it, the very fact that such a position exists tells us something important, that the question of whether life is good or bad isn't as simple as it seems. Some people don't take it for granted. They question it. And they try to follow that question wherever it leads. God is virus for mind. Some ideas spread faster than any virus. They don't infect the body. They infect the mind. One of the most powerful and persistent of these ideas is God. This doesn't mean belief in God is wrong, or irrational, or meaningless. The point here is different. It's about how the concept of God functions inside the human mind, how it spreads, and why it stays alive across centuries, cultures, and continents. Think of a computer virus. It hijacks the system, makes copies of itself, and spreads. The idea here is that some beliefs might work the same way, not physically, but cognitively. They survive because they're good at surviving, not necessarily because they're true. When we call something a mind virus, we're referring to ideas that latch onto common patterns of thought. They replicate through conversation, stories, rituals, and even fear. And the idea of a divine being hits many of the mind's deepest triggers: mystery, authority, justice, afterlife, purpose. It answers questions before you even ask them. Why are we here? Who made all this? What happens when we die? Even if the answers vary between religions, the structure stays the same. A higher power sees, judges, and rewards. That's an incredibly sticky idea. Once introduced, the God concept tends to resist deletion. It's reinforced through community, emotion, guilt, repetition, and it's often passed on to children long before they're able to question it. This doesn't mean all belief is blind. People find real comfort, meaning, and community in religion. But from a cognitive standpoint, it's worth asking, why does this specific structure of belief replicate so well? Some thinkers suggest it's because the God idea is self-protecting. It tells you not to question it. It warns you of consequences if you do. It surrounds itself with rituals and sacred language. In this sense, it behaves like a survival machine for itself. That's why some describe it as viral, not as an insult, but as an observation about how certain ideas spread and persist. This applies to more than just religion. Political ideologies, conspiracy theories, even social trends can behave like mental viruses. They use emotional hooks, social rewards, and repetition to stay alive. But religion, and especially the idea of God, may be the most successful version in human history. Whether you believe or not, the question remains: why is this idea so effective at embedding itself in human consciousness? For some, it's a sign that God is real. For others, it's proof that our brains are designed to crave structure and meaning, even if it has to invent it. Either way, it shows how powerful ideas can be. Once inside the mind, they don't need permission to spread. They just need to be good at surviving. And in that sense, God might be the most contagious idea we've ever known. Sympathy is just self-pity. When you feel bad for someone else, it might not be about them at all. The idea that sympathy is just self-pity challenges how we normally think about compassion. Sympathy is usually seen as a good thing, feeling concern for someone who's suffering, offering emotional support, and recognizing someone else's pain. But this idea flips that around. It suggests that what we call sympathy may actually be a disguised reaction to our own discomfort. Here's the core of it. When you see someone in pain, you might think you're feeling bad for them, but in many cases, you're actually feeling bad about how their suffering makes you feel. Their sadness triggers a sense of helplessness, guilt, or unease in you. Your reaction becomes centered on your own emotional response, not theirs. This isn't always intentional or obvious. In fact, it often feels sincere. But look closely, and the focus can shift. Instead of asking what the other person actually needs, the person offering sympathy might try to relieve their own tension by offering quick reassurance, over-identifying with the situation, or turning the conversation toward how they understand the pain. It starts to become about managing their own emotional discomfort rather than listening with real presence. For example, if someone loses their job and you say, "Oh no, I feel terrible for you. That's so awful." It sounds kind. But what if your words are more about your own fear of job loss, your discomfort with awkward situations, or your desire to say something so you don't feel passive? That's where sympathy starts to blur with self-pity. This idea doesn't claim that all sympathy is fake or selfish. Instead, it highlights a common psychological pattern: emotional projection. People tend to project their own experiences onto others. When someone else is hurt, we imagine how we would feel in that position and then respond based on that imagined version of pain. That's not the same as understanding what the other person is truly going through. There's also a subtle power dynamic involved. Sympathy can unintentionally frame the other person as weaker or in need of saving, while making the sympathizer feel morally upright or emotionally generous. But if the goal becomes feeling better about yourself, sympathy turns into a personal exercise, not an act of connection. In contrast, empathy tries to step into the other person's experience without turning the spotlight back onto yourself. It's quieter. It doesn't always have the same emotional expression, but it's more about listening than reacting. Sympathy often rushes to respond. Empathy pauses to understand. The idea that sympathy is just self-pity doesn't aim to dismiss kindness. It asks us to look more carefully at where our reactions come from. Because if the comfort we offer is more about soothing ourselves than supporting someone else, we might not be helping in the way we think we are. We may just be echoing our own fear of suffering, dressed up as concern. You trust pain more than possibility. Not everyone sees the glass as half full. Some people notice the cracks in the glass first. Pessimism is the tendency to expect bad outcomes, focus on problems, or assume things will go wrong. It's often framed as the opposite of optimism, where one person sees opportunity. The pessimist sees potential failure, but it's more than just a mood or personality trait. Pessimism is a way of thinking that influences how people approach life, decisions, and even relationships. At its core, pessimism is based on caution. Pessimists often imagine worst-case scenarios before they happen, not necessarily because they want things to go badly, but because they want to be prepared. It's a form of mental defense, a way to avoid disappointment by expecting it ahead of time. This kind of thinking can start early, especially if someone has faced a lot of setbacks or unpredictable situations. If things have gone wrong often enough in the past, the brain starts to assume that this is just how life works. In that context, pessimism doesn't feel negative. It feels realistic. Pessimism shows up in small ways. A person might hesitate to try something new because they assume it won't work out. They might downplay good news because they expect it to be temporary. They might approach conversations with suspicion rather than trust. In some cases, it's a protective habit, thinking ahead, double-checking, spotting red flags. But over time, it can also limit how people experience success or joy. Philosophically, pessimism has been explored by thinkers who believe that human life, at its core, is filled with more suffering than happiness. Writers like Arthur Schopenhauer argued that desire leads to frustration, and that pleasure is just the temporary relief from discomfort. From this view, pessimism isn't about being gloomy. It's about recognizing that pain and difficulty are built into the human experience. Psychologically, studies have shown that pessimism isn't always harmful. In fact, a specific type called defensive pessimism can actually improve performance. When people expect things to go wrong, they sometimes prepare more carefully, work harder, and avoid overconfidence. But chronic pessimism, where someone always expects failure and avoids taking risks, can lead to stress, missed opportunities, and even health issues. Culturally, pessimism is often misunderstood. It's seen as negativity or complaining, but for many people, it's a genuine way of managing uncertainty. They're not hoping for the worst, they're trying to stay ready for it. And while that mindset can be heavy, it also reflects a desire for control in an unpredictable world. In the end, pessimism is one of the many ways people respond to uncertainty and risk. It's not about lacking hope. It's about being cautious with it. Whether it holds someone back or helps them stay grounded depends on how it's used and how much space it takes up in their view of the world. Everyone has their own complex life. You might see hundreds of people in a single day and not think twice about any of them. A glance, a nod, maybe a polite smile, and then they're gone. But behind each of those moments is a full life that keeps going, just as detailed and messy as your own. It's something most of us know but rarely think about. Every person you see is the main character in their own story. They wake up with plans, memories, expectations. They carry arguments from yesterday, hopes for tomorrow, and things they've never said out loud, just like you do. But the strange thing is, we don't see any of that. Most people appear in our lives as background, a delivery driver, someone scrolling their phone at the bus stop, a co-worker walking past. We see their surface, maybe a few actions, and we fill in the blanks without realizing it. It's not because we're selfish. Our minds naturally simplify the world so we can get through the day. But that shortcut comes with a cost. We forget how much we're not seeing. Take a random person at a grocery store. To you, they're just standing in front of the cereal shelf, but maybe they're rushing to get groceries before visiting someone in the hospital. Maybe they're newly divorced and trying to figure out how to shop for one person instead of two. Or maybe they're having a totally normal day, but one small detail, the brand of cereal they pick, is something their dad used to buy, and now they always do too. None of that is visible, but it's there. And this doesn't just apply to strangers. Even people close to you have corners of their life you'll never fully understand. Things they're struggling with, habits they don't explain, memories they carry that never come up in conversation. Complexity doesn't mean chaos, it just means that people are layered in ways we often miss. It also helps explain why people sometimes act in ways that don't make sense to us. A short temper, a quiet withdrawal, an unexpected reaction. These might come from places we'll never be shown. Not because someone's hiding something, but because most of life happens internally. This idea isn't about being endlessly empathetic or trying to guess what everyone's going through. It's simply about remembering that what you see is a sliver of what's there. No one is just a guy at the bus stop. No one is just that person from the office. Everyone is carrying a story, even if they never say a word about it. The world isn't made of crowds. It's made of individuals, and every one of them is living a life just as real as yours. Constant uncertainty of future. No one really knows what's going to happen next. That's not just a guess, it's a basic fact of life. The future is always uncertain. Plans help, patterns help, but there's never a guarantee. You might expect things to go a certain way, and they might, or they might take a sharp turn when you least expect it. Whether it's something as small as missing a train or as big as losing a job, the future always holds variables you can't see coming. This idea isn't about being pessimistic. It's about understanding how uncertainty is built into how life works. You can prepare, you can predict, but you can't fully control. And that applies to everything: your health, your relationships, your career, even how you feel a week from now. Take something simple. You wake up, go to work, come home. That's the routine. But even on a predictable day, anything from a phone call to a flat tire can change the entire direction. Multiply that across weeks, months, or years, and the effect becomes much bigger. People enter your life unexpectedly. Plans fall apart. Opportunities show up when you weren't looking for them. And sometimes, things you've worked hard for simply don't go your way, not because of a mistake, but because something outside your control shifted. One of the harder parts of this is how the brain doesn't like uncertainty. It's always looking for patterns, answers, some sense of stability. So when things feel unpredictable, it creates stress. That's why people worry, not necessarily because something bad is happening, but because something might happen, and they don't know what to do with that possibility. Still, uncertainty isn't always a bad thing. It's also the reason change is possible. If the future were fixed, nothing could improve. You couldn't grow, adapt, or recover. New relationships wouldn't happen. Surprises wouldn't exist. In a strange way, uncertainty is what allows hope to exist in the first place. Because the fact that things can go wrong also means they can go right. Even with that in mind, the uncertainty of the future still affects how people make decisions. Some freeze up and avoid change altogether, hoping things will stay the same. Others take risks, trying to shape outcomes even when the results aren't guaranteed. There's no right answer, because there's no way to be fully sure how things will turn out. At the end of the day, this constant uncertainty isn't something you solve. It's something you live with. Every decision you make, every direction you take, happens with a limited view of what's ahead. But that's the nature of time. You never get the full picture, just the piece you're standing on. And that piece keeps moving forward, whether you're ready for it or not. First experience of death. At some point, usually when we're young, we find out that people don't live forever. The first experience of death is something most people remember, even if they don't talk about it much. It's the moment you realize that someone who was here, a grandparent, a pet, a neighbor, is now gone, and they're not coming back. That shift is simple to explain, but not easy to process. It marks the first time the idea of permanence disappears. At first, the concept of death doesn't always land. For kids, it's often described gently. They're in a better place, or they've gone to sleep. But eventually, the truth comes through. Death is final. Someone you could talk to, laugh with, or hug is suddenly unreachable. The door is closed and no one's sure what's on the other side. What makes this moment so significant isn't just the loss itself, it's the way it changes how we see the world. Before this, life can feel endless. Days are long. People seem solid. And the idea that anything could vanish forever doesn't really exist. But after that first death, everything looks a little more temporary. It introduces a type of awareness that didn't exist before. For some, it happens gradually. A pet gets old, a relative is sick. The concept builds over time. For others, it happens suddenly. A phone call, an accident, a loss with no warning. In either case, the effect is similar. A realization that life has limits and that those limits apply to everyone. This experience also introduces a new kind of emotional complexity. Sadness becomes more layered. It's no longer about missing a toy or being left out. It's about absence, a type of silence that wasn't there before. People start to carry grief in small, private ways. And even if they don't talk about it, it shapes how they think about time, relationships, and what really matters. Another effect of that first loss is the way it redefines what feels real. The world might seem a bit less stable afterward. That can show up as fear or curiosity or even a strange kind of motivation. Some people become more cautious, others more appreciative, but nearly everyone comes out of it a little more aware of what's at stake. The first experience of death isn't just about someone else being gone. It's the moment you understand that nothing, not even life, is guaranteed to last. And once you see that, it doesn't go away. You still grow up, make plans, and move on, but part of your brain now knows. Everything is temporary, and some things can't be undone. It's one of the earliest moments where reality sharpens, and it leaves a lasting impression, even if you don't notice it until much later.